you guys for tuning in to the War Room with Chris and Eddie. I'm your host, Chris Baldwin, here with my friend and award-winning sports journalist, Eddie Goldman from No Holds Barred News. And we're super excited to have women's boxing historian, Malissa Smith, back in the War Room today. She's going to be joining us on a regular basis, and I'm just stoked about that. She is the author of A History of Women's Boxing. It's so good to have you both here today to discuss the latest boxing news and this Showtime pay-per-view event tonight featuring Jake Paul versus Tyron Woodley as the main event, but we know the real main event should be the Amanda Serrano versus Yamileth Mercado fight, as Serrano defends her WBC and WBO belts tonight on Showtime. Now, Malissa, since you are back in the War Room and you are the women's boxing historian, I want you to give us your comments on this fight tonight against Serrano and Mercado. What does Mercado have to do to defeat the highly skilled Amanda Serrano?
Mercado has to really bring her A+++ game. She's a shorter fighter. She's an orthodox fighter. She does not do well with brawling or with someone who really comes in and attacks. And that's something that Amanda Serrano is famous for. Especially, she'll run you down in the first round. For the listeners, all they need to do is watch the Amanda Serrano-Heather Hardy fight to see just how intense Amanda Serrano can be in the first round. And Mercado, given in her last outing with Angelica Rascon, did not respond to that. And Rascon wasn't even that great a fighter. And somebody like Serrano is just can and does have the ability to come in and swamp and get that first or second round knockout. So that's one of the things that she has to do. She also has to, realize she's fighting a southpaw and a really savvy southpaw who sticks to fundamentals, who is very highly technical in how she executes her game. So she needs to get inside as much as she can because Serrano is the taller fighter with the longer reach. She needs to be able to go to her right. She needs to play the game with whose foot is on the outside, because again, she's fighting a southpaw. And she really has to be clever in how she attacks Serrano. Again, even though Heather Hardy fight is an interesting guideline because Hardy survived 10 rounds. And part of why she survived those 10 rounds and did not get a KO was her ability to just keep coming forward. And at some points execute and outpunch Serrano. So that is kind of the way she's going to have to approach this. I do know that she's number 3 on the and she is a WBC bantamweight title holder or senior, whatever that is, right. Junior lightweight. I always get confused on which is bantamweight. Super bantam junior lightweight, but as a super bantam. She is the WBC title holder. We have her on the Ring Magazine boxing ranking. We have her ranked as number 3. Number 1 is, of course, the great Jackie Nava. And from what I've been told, Jackie Nava has actually been working with Mercado in camp to help her get prepared for this fight. So we'll see whether she really is able to step up and execute.
Eddie, what do you think? What do you think she's going to the table?
I agree. I mean, Melissa's much more familiar, but she sent a link to a YouTube video of Mercado's last fight with Rascon that was on Box Azteca in Mexico. And the scoring was all over the place. The official scoring was ridiculously wide for Mercado and typical of a WBC show in Mexico. It was a close fight. It frankly could have gone either way. Rascon was brawling, and Mercado, I thought in the first round and a couple of rounds, she was able to hold her off. Rascon was really sloppy. Both fighters, it looked like both fighters got penalized a point for holding. The referee was breaking them up every 5 seconds, it seemed. And I don't know how much damage Rascon did. Rascon was cut by both below and above her right eye. I'm not sure if that was from a punch or a headbutt. It seemed to impede her a little bit, but she came in with really wild overhand rights and really needed to work on her technique. So I'm not against giving that fight to Mercado, but if you're going up against somebody like Amanda Serrano, that's not going to do it, particularly since Mercado's going up in weight. Again, it's only a couple of pounds, but if you've ever talked to fighters in these lower weight classes where they're like 3 and 4 pounds difference, you ask them, does that 4 pounds really make a difference? And they go, yeah, it makes all the difference in the world. So it's a legitimate fight though, because you do have a 126-pound champion who's been a 7 division weight champion with all these different weight classes of Amanda Serrano against somebody who's been a 122-pound champion who's a good fighter. But she's also has not fought in the United States. I don't know what kind of atmosphere is going to be in Cleveland at this thing, because I don't think too many people are coming to see Amanda Serrano and Mercado. I think they're coming to see some bleached blonde, Aryan-looking white guy who, just throw haymakers and calling it boxing against a black All-American wrestler who used to fight for UFC. So I don't know what'll happen. The idea is that, oh, well, we'll put on a real fight like this. It is a deserving fight. And these other people will become boxing fans. I don't necessarily see it. I mean, I think it's like bringing, a gospel choir singing civil rights hymns to a Trump rally. It's not going to, I don't think it's really going to work. And I think the fact that a fight like this, again, Serrano's clearly the favorite. I expect her to win decisively, but it's still a worthwhile fight. That a fight like this has to end up on this garbage clown show really is a testament to the lack of proper promotion of women's boxing by the promoters. You have Clarissa Shields. I know sometimes Clarissa's controversial, but she's certainly a highly successful and undefeated fighter. She has to go to another sport she has almost no experience in, MMA, and a first fight against a grappler, where she was losing the first 2 rounds till she came out and won that 3rd round, and said she made more money on the PFL, which is sort of like the 3rd or 4th largest MMA promotion in the US. She made more money on that than any of her boxing fights. And she had fought on Showtime. I think she was once on HBO. She fought on DAZN. She's fought on a bunch of places, and she makes more money on an MMA show. So that to me is the real disgraceful thing about this. And we could go over the other fights. I am not gonna. I generally don't buy pay-per-views because they cost too much and they've killed boxing. And the promoters should really know this. They're making what started off as a grassroots, working class, and poor people and immigrant sport, running it on a country club television and streaming business model. And it's just killing access to the damn sport. And you have the clown show fight. And of the real fighters on this card, other than Serrano and Mercado, they all look like egregious mismatches to me. So I'll wait till the one fight I really want to see. I could read the results. The other fights, of course, is Serrano and Mercado. And I'll look for that on YouTube or something.
So who else is on this undercard?
The undercard has Daniel Dubois.
Oh, he is on this card.
Yes, he holds this bogus interim WBA heavyweight belt, which they say they're getting rid of, which is preposterous. And he's fighting a club fighter named Joe Cusimano. And this is Dubois, I think it's his debut fight in the US. So this is a showcase fight. You're having Ivan Baranchik, who usually gives exciting fights, against another guy who's a club fighter, Montana Love, who has built up record on club shows. Charles Conwell, 15-0, fights Juan Carlos Rubio, 18-0. But if you look beyond the records, Rubio has only fought outside Mexico twice, both in Florida. And if you look at whom he's beaten, it's no one of note. And Conwell seems to be a legitimate prospect, but unfortunately, he's mostly known when he knocked out Patrick Day in 2019, and Patrick Day died 4 days later. You're having a 4-rounder of Tommy Fury, who's there because of his name, 6-0 against somebody named Anthony Taylor, 0-1, who I think trains with the Clowns. And that's the card. And of course, you got whichever the Paul Aryans are fighting against Tyron Woodley, who was a 2-time All-American at Missouri. I saw him wrestle back in the day when he was a teammate of Ben Askren, who was a 4-time All-American, 2-time NCAA champion and Olympian. Ben was a better wrestler, but Tyrone was a good wrestler. And then he went into Strikeforce and then UFC, where he lost his last 4 bouts there. So the point of this is to have the bigger white YouTube guy knock out the black former UFC fighter and promote the white supremacy that these clown show fights are meant to promote. And I see it in a long line of promotion of white supremacy in boxing. I was talking with Malissa about this before earlier today. When you had in the 60s and 70s, that great era with people like Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier and George Foreman and Ken Norton and all the great fighters of that era, the white fighters are not doing very well. So what was done, Sylvester Stallone, who a little later became big friends with Trump when he was in office and a supporter, makes these Rocky movies where the white guy, the underdog, wins the title. And people were giving it Academy Awards and all this stuff. What was a white supremacist theme, more sophisticated and modern than D.W. Griffith, but still white supremacist. Then you had the build up for Jerry Cooney and Larry Holmes, which should not have even be viewed at the time as a close fight. And there was the placing, they put a telephone line from Ronald Reagan, who's then president, in Cooney's dressing room, anticipating he would win, but not in Holmes's dressing room when Holmes won. And I also see it as a broader sense of culture, where in the 50s you had white singers and entertainers such as Elvis Presley and Pat Boone doing bleached out covers of black music. And it just goes on and on and on. You could give a million more examples of this. And this is, I think, an aspect that should really be emphasized about what this is. Jake Paul or his brother Logan Paul cannot be successful legitimately in any combat sport in a real sense if they just went in the regular way of trying to work their way up. So they fight retired or faded athletes from other sports in boxing to make themselves look good and pass this off basically to marks of MMA who think that MMA has decent striking and all that when it basically doesn't in almost all cases.
But what I don't understand is why aren't they fighting an MMA fight if both of those guys are wrestlers? Why are they boxing? I mean, why are they ruining the sport?
Because Woodley can't box, and Paul was actually a high school wrestler that had the Paul brothers were high school wrestlers in Ohio, and they had some success there, but they didn't really carry it forward. Woodley was at a Division I school, a 2-time All-American at Missouri, and would completely out wrestle him. So that's why they're not doing it in MMA. Plus MMA, they doing this as an independent pay-per-view on
As
Showtime.
professional boxers.
Yes,
Yeah, and the other thing, part of this is, it's this sort of let's play boxing
Right.
out of this kind of white collar boxing notion, or being on some kind of, oh gee, I'll play boxing and won't that be fun? I'm going to actually beat a champion, which is of course ridiculous. Look, we had a situation yesterday where there was a fight card up in Montreal. A woman's fighter named Cabal won. She was great, but on the undercard there was a young Mexican woman, 18 years old, who got knocked out in the fourth round, and she's in the hospital wavering between life and death. So boxing doesn't play.
Right. You don't
It's
play
real
boxing.
sport. You do not play boxing,
Right.
and there's something very dangerous about it's the hubris of saying, hey, I can do this, I'm a macho man, and it's really taking
Well,
the
a lot
sport.
of boxers got started like that. Watching other boxers, they jump off the bar stool and into the boxing ring. It's like, oh, I can do that.
I can do that, but the fact is, as we all know, the real boxers aren't like that. They're the gentlest people in the world. They spend their lives all day, every day, boxing, 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 training, training, training.
Right. And this is what my complaint is, because my friend Marky, he is a cut man and he has a boxing gym and he's worked with the Paul brothers. And it's my point to him is why this guy gets to jump the line only because he's a white dude. It's like the great white hope gets to jump the line in front of everybody. And it's a smack in the
Absolutely.
face to every amateur Golden Gloves, every guy out there trying to get in front of a champion who wants their take or their shot at a belt. And you just get to
Absolutely.
jump right in front of Floyd Mayweather, just like that.
Yeah, and you had these early fights on DAZN because they're trying to build a brand. So it's like, okay, to Eddie's point, two white dudes trying to figure out how they're
Right.
going to take boxing over. So you had,
And now they fucked it all up.
so we're going to have a real
one
card.
of them lost. I get the
Yeah,
two.
one of them did.
I
Yeah.
get the two brothers mixed up. I usually don't, but it shows you how little I care for this
Right.
stuff. But one of these guys fought this guy named KSI, and I forget his real name, and he lost the damn fight.
Yeah,
Yet
he
he's
did.
the one being pushed and promoted through all of this kind of nonsense. And it's the why boxing and not MMA. In terms of prestige and understanding in the world, the highest and most prestigious and dangerous form of fighting is boxing, not MMA. There are all these other combat sports, but if you talk about fighting, boxing is number one for a reason, and is not going to be supplanted, in my opinion, by MMA, and because of all the other stuff that you could do in MMA other than boxing.
I will add that, with the Serrano fight, Serrano has 30 KOs on her record. Christy Martin, who arguably, is certainly put women's boxing on the map in 1996, she has 32. So also, part of this for Serrano is trying to get her within striking distance of that record, because if she wins tonight,
She's
with a
going to knock
KO.
out. I'm predicting a knockout tonight.
Yeah.
Serrano's
I
gonna
would
knock
be
Mercado
surprised.
out.
Yeah, I would be surprised if she doesn't, based certainly on Mercado's last performance. And that'll put her at 31 knockouts, one to go to match, and then, basically two to take over the record. So there's a lot from pure boxing, and boxing is a real sport, and the kind of work and dedication that real fighters put into it on this card. And that's what's so kind of shocking about it. I mean, there's this weird kind of stuff where Paul actually said, hey, he wanted a real women's boxing fight on the card, which kind of really confused me, to tell you the truth, because so much of everything else about this card is not real at all, not the least of which is his own boxing match. So it's also, to Eddie's point earlier, talking about Precious Seals, Amanda Serrano has also gone into MMA and stepped off from boxing for a while, again, because she can't get the paydays. Now she's getting a really good payday for this. So for her, it's a win-win. She'll win unless something crazy happens, and she gets exposure, although it may not be the exposure of boxing fans per se. She's also showing that she's going to be bringing in fans to watch this fight. And
So-
she
Go
got
ahead,
a
I'm sorry.
decent machine going in terms of publicity for this and the interviews that she's been doing, and getting prestigious journalists in the boxing world to really put out great content about her and her capacities as a boxer. So for her, it's a really great opportunity. But it's as Eddie says, it's in the middle of a clown show, and we don't know what this really will mean for the sport.
So you guys think this clown show has been marketed primarily to the MMA crowd because of Jake Paul, and then they're trying to bring in more boxing fans because so let's add the Serrano fight to the card. I mean,
Tell you the
To
truth,
morons, it's been to people that are sort of sports and brawling and WWE and UFC enthusiasts and people like that who don't really understand any of the techniques and the proper forms of fighting or combat sports and martial arts. People at the late great Uncle Roger would say don't know shit about boxing. That's who this is being marketed
Right.
to.
okay.
And it's just
And
a
then
money grab for Showtime.
yeah, it certainly is, and especially at $59.95 a pop. And he's this Instagram. He's what is this media influencer? I don't even know what that is. I'm just too old for this. But
You and me both.
What
I
do they,
can't
as
stand it.
influencers, but what do? They
I-
act like spoiled brats and crazy. They just promote the worst kind of antisocial behavior. And the door to this kind of stuff was fully opened when John McCain led the way to banning MMA in the 1990s from pay-per-view television, and a number of companies, Extreme Fighting went broke, and the UFC was on the verge of closing down when the Fertittas bought it, and Fertitta and Dana White turned it into a knockoff of WWE. They didn't have fixed fights. They were real fights, but it was the same type of culture of brawling, and with the Ultimate Fighter show and all of that, and they just degraded the combat sports by doing this. And this is just another step in that direction to also try to fill the shoes of what happened in boxing, with again boxing losing its popularity because of the short-term greed of the promoters and networks of putting almost all the decent fights on pay-per-view, and then just getting worse and worse and worse, and American boxing in particular declining. I mean, look at who some of the most popular boxers in the world are today. How many of them are Americans? There are a lot of good fighters who are from the United States, but there aren't that many that are top level as there were in the past. Why is that? It's because of the bad organization and promotion and corruption, and a lot of athletes who otherwise in the past might have gone into boxing in the United States went into other sports, would go into other sports. Maybe they go into NFL or college football or basketball or something like that, instead of going, or even baseball, instead of going into boxing. So we're left with and
We're
they
left
fill
with
in the
the shit
void with
show.
this. Yeah, we're left with the shit show for $59.99.
$59.99.
Yeah.
Well, you guys talked me out of buying that because I was going to support, but once you started talking about
I haven't decided. I may go ahead and support Amanda on it. I'll
yeah,
see
that's
how
what I
I
was
feel a
going to
little
do.
bit later.
Just to support it.
Just there's so little that women get. Again, I just got to say her name, Jeanette Zacarias Zapata, 18-year-old Mexican fighter. She's between life and death. This is not a game. This is not a game. It's a real sport with real consequences. And my objection to this kind of stuff is it really takes away from just how serious it is. And you, in one sense, your heart's in your mouth that one of these Paul doesn't get a lucky shot and really put somebody in the hospital. Because they're big and they just loop those little haymakers over and somebody can get really hurt.
Exactly. Those
Or they can
haymakers,
get hurt, you know.
those
by a real
haymakers
shot.
knock people out.
Exactly.
And they might promote it like that because they do have, as I said earlier, Conwell is on this card. And are they going to make a big deal that, oh, he beat a guy who died 4 days later? You know,
Yeah.
the other side of it with paying for this for Serrano and Mercado, it is boxing and almost anything could happen. In Mercado's fight with Rascon, there was said Rascon was cut pretty badly. Well,
Right.
cuts happen in boxing, either from a punch or accidentally or intentionally or whatever. Who knows how long this fight is going to last? Any of these fights could end prematurely in a cut. You don't get your $59.99 back if the fight's over in 30 seconds.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, when you have a southpaw and an orthodox fighter together, which is Serrano and Mercado, headbutts are always the issue, are always a concern.
I'll wait till it's on YouTube.
So where does the Serrano go if she beats Mercado, when she beats
Well,
Mercado?
Serrano is really wants to become undisputed at her title at featherweight and at 126. And there's one more belt to get. I think it's held by Cruz, and she's not ready to do that, to have that fight. She was offered $100,000 for a bout and said, nope, not yet. I like my belt. So we'll see what happens. There's also been talk over the last few days of a deal between Matchroom and her promoter and Amanda's promoter, Lou DeBella Entertainment, to finally have Amanda Serrano meet Katie Taylor at Madison Square Garden. Sometime in March, maybe for International Women's Day.
I want to see that fight.
Irish, Puerto Rican Day.
Yeah, I want to see that fight
on St. Pat's, something
Lou
like that.
DeBella, you better make that shit happen. Okay, make
We
that
all
shit
want to
happen.
see that fight. But the thing is, these ladies they deserve $1 million. Let's get that
Damn
final
right.
American
Damn right.
$1 million. Let's get the 7 figures for these ladies.
That's
And
right.
Who's going to show it? DAZN? Because
Who
Katie
knows?
Taylor's with DAZN.
I don't know. I don't
In
know
the
where-
US, who's going to show it?
I don't know. I don't know where this
DAZN will
goes.
show it internationally, but
Yeah,
there's not much money in that because of Katie Taylor. Other than Ireland and the UK, there'll be people watching, but also it'll be on at 4 o'clock in the morning, in those time zones.
Yeah, so we'll see whether this actually happens. They were started negotiating 3 years ago. It was on, it was off. Then of course COVID happened, and now Serrano is actually her trajectory. I think was really still in ascendancy in a way that Katie Taylor's kind of flat. She has a mandatory fight next weekend with Jennifer Hahn. I don't know how Jennifer Hahn, who's a lighter weight, suddenly the mandatory at lightweight. She's a featherweight, but she's a good fighter out of Texas, New Mexico. Sorry, I'm blanking on where she's from, but she is a good fighter. She hasn't fought in a while, so we'll see what that's going to look like. So, and my understanding is that Katie Taylor may have one other mandatory in between. And then it's a question of whether or not Serrano fight Cruz, become undisputed, what that's going to look like, where that money's going to come from. Because, Serrano has 7 belts in 7 weight classes, which is extraordinary for any fighter. But the thing that's eluded her is being undisputed, which she really wants. And I think from the marketing perspective of her versus Taylor, they want to go undisputed versus undisputed. So we'll see what happens and whether they ever actually meet, or it may be that this is just one of these fights that
There you go.
never happened.
Well,
Right.
somebody has to pay for it, and we'll see what particularly DAZN is willing to do, because they've had some women's fights in there, but not a whole lot. And Katie Taylor is with them, so we'll see whether they want to put a card around that.
But we'll see. Certainly DAZN was trying to, Matchroom Boxing, DAZN was trying to, promote women this summer. They just ran into a lot of trouble finding opponents, in part because of money. Some of it's COVID because of restrictions on travel and so on. But money certainly does play a part in it. And whether or not this fight gets what it truly deserves, time will tell.
Right, and then I have a feeling that it's going to be the wrong people seeing it to promote Amanda Serrano.
Yeah.
That these people, that even if they do have a good fight and it does really, and Serrano wins and looks impressive, it's very possible that the people watching it aren't going to understand that, and they're there for the trash.
So Eddie,
Yeah.
anything else going on in the boxing world you want to share with us?
Well,
Yeah.
you have the whole situation in the heavyweight division happening, where you supposedly going to have two heavyweight fights coming up in the next several weeks. September 25th, Anthony Joshua, who holds 3 of the major belts, against Alexander Usyk, who had been the undisputed cruiserweight champion, has not looked impressive in his couple of fights at heavyweights, much smaller. And that'll get a huge crowd in London at the Tottenham Stadium, the big football stadium. And then supposedly October 9th, Tyson Fury, if he's recovered from COVID and there aren't any more excuses, will be having his third fight with Deontay Wilder in Las Vegas, in a fight that almost nobody wants to see. And if those two fights take place, Eddie Hearn is saying that the Fury Wilder 3 fight won't take place, but he may just be giving them shit, from a rival promoter. But Fury does have a very spotty record in terms of fighting on the dates he's supposed to. But if they do take place and both Joshua and Fury win, what's going to be the excuse not to have Fury versus Joshua in 2022? And if they don't do it then, and there's more crap, these guys are going to start to get old, and they're just pissing tens and hundreds of millions of dollars out the window from this whole self-destructive situation and governance in boxing. So it's an absolute mess. And then you're going to have more of these clown Paul brothers against wrestlers, or, what of TV stars against basketball players, or YouTube influencers, against
It's the
rappers.
dancing of the stars in the combat sports.
Yeah,
It's
I imagine.
Kardashians and
Right.
it's just the
Exactly.
Kardashians, some version of Kardashians.
Exactly. Shit is crazy. Yeah. All right. Well, look, folks, that's all we have today. Eddie, you want to give a shout out to the people about where they can find you on your Patreon and your Twitter and all of that?
Yeah, the main place on social media is Twitter at NHB News. I still have my accounts on these other sites, but I'm really not using them anymore. I'm just keeping them up for reference. You could look at my website, eddiegoldman.com, and my Patreon, where I have a whole lot of articles. It's mainly premium articles. So I ask people to subscribe to that at patreon.com/Eddie Goldman. I'd put all that stuff up for free if I could get some support from some of these media sites, but most of them are mesmerized by these clown show fights, and which is again, a symptom of the complete lack of journalistic integrity and ethics. So
Right.
I got to ask people to pay directly for it.
Right on. How about you, Melissa? Let's share where people can find you.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks again. First is at Girl Boxing Now on Twitter and on Instagram. That's where I'm most active. I have girlboxing.org, which is my blog site. Starting to put content out, and I'll be putting out an article a week. I also have a Facebook girl boxing page that just sort of repeats some content. So if you happen to be there, you can find some articles and things. And then if you want to buy my book,
That's right.
please,
That's right.
Amazon.com has a history of women's boxing available in hardback, paperback, or Kindle.
Right on. All right, guys, you can find me at Angry Afro Radio on Twitter, and I'm at La Fight Goddess on Instagram. This has been the War Room with Chris and Eddie, and now Melissa is joining the team. Yay! So you guys will be back next week in the War Room. Stay tuned. Peace, love, and push-ups. And we out. Boom. All right. Good job, team.
Awesome.